Welcome to Programming with Professor Califf. Today I'd like to talk about naming things in Java. So we're going to talk about identifiers. An identifier is just a word for names of things in a program, the things we need to identify. So variables will also have classes and methods, just the various things that we add to the program that we need names for. So those names are called identifiers. These are the rules that we have to follow in order for the computer to understand our program correctly. So when we go to create an identifier, such as a variable name, it has to start with a letter, A through Z, or an underscore. Technically speaking, we could also use a $sign, but that is only used for system-generated identifiers, so we're going to ignore that fact. Subsequent characters in our name can be letters, underscores, $signs, or digits. As long as we follow these rules, the computer will be able to understand our identifiers and use them. However, the computer is not our only audience. We have also a set of conventions, because whenever we write a program, we're really writing for two different audiences. One is the computer. The computer just cares that we follow the rules, and it will do what we tell it to do as long as we've followed those simple rules. However, we're also writing for human beings, the people we work with, ourselves 2 or 3 years from now when we're trying to figure out what on earth we were thinking. Because of that, we want our programs to be readable. And so we have a set of conventions for how to name things that are supposed to help our programs be more readable, because as long as we follow the conventions, and the people who are trying to read our code know the conventions, then they will have an easier time going through and understanding our code. Sometimes these conventions will vary by organization. So if you go out and work in some company using Java, they may have a set of conventions that are a little bit different from the ones we're learning here. But there is a set of conventions that most people do follow for Java, and that's what we're going to talk about here. These conventions are different for different kinds of identifiers. So we're going to name variables, constants, classes, methods, and eventually other things. Each of those has its own rules. And so we'll talk about the rules for different kinds of things as we learn about them. Today we're going to talk about guidelines for variable names, since we're already using variables and we should know how to name them well. A variable name should be a noun or a noun phrase that describes the data. We have one exception to that for Boolean values when they're true or false. It should be in camel case. So if you've never heard that term, what it means is that we're going to start with a lowercase letter. Then for each subsequent word in our variable name, we're going to capitalize the first letter of that word. Not going to use any underscores. We may use digits. Usually they'll fall at the end, though sometimes it may make sense to put one in the middle. We're going to avoid cryptic abbreviations. So we can abbreviate a little bit, but we want to be very, very careful that our abbreviation wouldn't be confusing and that you don't need to have a lot of knowledge about what the program's supposed to be about in order to understand the abbreviation. We're also, however, going to avoid variables being long unnecessarily. Is number of students really easier to understand than num students? Probably not. And when we have something very long, it takes extra effort on our part to read it and parse what it says. What we want to do is to keep things not terribly long, but long enough to be clear. That's really the goal. So let's look at a few examples here. Student name. Pretty obviously something to hold the name of a student. Middle initial. So that's probably a character that has someone's middle initial in it. Hourly pay rate. The rate at which someone gets paid by the hour. Has graduated. So this would be an exception. It's not a noun phrase, but it's pretty clearly something to hold whether or not someone has graduated. Is complete. Very similar. Num pepperoni pizzas. Now, if we don't care whether they're pepperoni or something else, we would want to go with num pizzas. This should only be used if it matters that it's pepperoni pizzas and we're trying to distinguish it from other kinds of pizzas. Hit points. So that's something you might see in a lot of different games. Final exam score. Favorite color. Title. Now, I wanted to include this to show they don't have to be multiple words. You can have just a one-word variable, that's fine. Though whether this is appropriate depends partly on your context. So if you have different kinds of titles, like book titles or movie titles, and it matters which it is, then you might want to add the extra information. Always make sure you have enough information to distinguish what it is we're talking about. Thanks for watching. I hope you feel like you have a little bit better understanding of what the expectations are for naming variables in Java. See you next time.